Welcome to the Truth and Liberty broadcast. We believe we have a mandate to bring godly change to our nation and the world through the 7 spheres or mountains of influence. To further this cause, we give away a product every week that will empower you to get involved in changing your life and changing our world. You can register for our weekly giveaway by subscribing at truthandliberty.net. You can also subscribe to our newsletter to receive weekly updates on guests, news, and much more. This is an interactive live cast, and we welcome your questions. To ask a question during the live cast, use the comment or chat features. Now get ready to dive into this week's topics with our hosts on location in Colorado, USA.
Hello and welcome to our Monday Night Truth and Liberty live cast. We're glad that you're with us. And this evening we've got a guest all the way from Alaska. We've got Governor Mike Dunleavy that's with us, and we're going to be interviewing him tonight. And just in the lead up to the program, we were learning quite a bit about Alaska. I'm sure that he'll share some with you, and man, it sounds good. I was thinking that might be a nice place to move to. They're pretty conservative. Things are going good. So anyway, we're going to have an interview with him, but this is Richard Harris. He's our Chief Counsel here at Truth and Liberty, and he's going to share with you some things about how you can participate tonight and ask questions. And also we got meetings coming up, a lot of things.
All right. Well, thank you, Andrew. So good to have Governor Dunleavy with us, and really looking forward to tonight. Thank you, everybody, for watching. I wanted to share that we have a resources page at Truth and Liberty. If you've never checked that out, I encourage you to do that. We're in an off year election-wise, but there are primaries going on and some elections taking place around the country, especially locally. So if you've got school board elections in your area or municipal elections, why don't you check out iVoter Guide. You can find a link on our resources page, as well as various voter information there. I wanted to mention that we've got a bunch of activities coming up here, including this week here at Andrew Wommack Ministries. It's going to be a great summer. The first thing I want to mention is this week we're starting the Kingdom Business Summit. It starts this Wednesday here at the campus in Woodland Park, and John Maxwell is going to be teaching and sharing, along with Andrew and Billy Epperhart, Karen Conrad, who's a wonderful speaker, and then Dean Radke, former CEO of the Limited, captain in the United States Navy, a great leader. I tell you, that's a great event. If you want to learn leadership principles and how to build wealth for the kingdom of God, that's an event you won't want to miss. I think you still have time. Check that out on our website at awmi.net/events. And then this Saturday is Stand Courageous. This is an event sponsored by our really good friends at Family Research Council. Tony Perkins will be speaking, along with General Jerry Boykin, Delta Force fame. General Boykin, I tell you, he's a true, real American hero. Bishop Larry Jackson, Stu Weber are all going to be ministering, and it's going to be an awesome event this Saturday, right before Father's Day. What we're going to be doing there is talking to men about our calling as men in the kingdom of God to stand up and fulfill God's design for us and His plan for our lives. So it's something you won't want to miss. July 4th is right around the corner. It's hard to believe the summer is already flying by. I love the 4th of July, and especially In God We Trust, the musical here at Charis Bible College, which is this year. It's right before the Summer Family Bible Conference. Check that out on our website. It's an amazing performance you won't want to miss. Your whole family can come and be blessed and be reminded about why we're thankful and why we should be proud in a good way of the blessings of being an American. And also wanted to mention in August, the Healing is Here conference, August 10th through the 13th. I tell you, miracles, healings, people getting out of wheelchairs, blind eyes opened, cancer being healed, incredible miracles. If you need healing, you need to make plans to be here for that event. And then also our Truth and Liberty Coalition Conference in September, the 10th and 11th, on the 20th anniversary of 9/11. Encourage you to make plans now to attend that. It's going to be awesome. Andrew mentioned this is an interactive process. If you're not a subscriber to Truth and Liberty, you really need to subscribe. Just go on our website to the upper right-hand corner there, click subscribe, give us your email address, and you'll be entered in to win a free giveaway of one of Andrew's products here. Tonight we've got Effortless Change. You know, the Word of God has power in it. It's like a seed. And Andrew teaches in this book about how when you plant the Word in your heart and it grows, it will produce the change that you desire. It's not by might nor by power, but by my Spirit, says the Lord. So subscribe today, be eligible to receive that. And you'll also get our blogs, our weekly. We're sending out 3 or 4 blogs a week now, chock full of powerful information, useful stuff, action alerts, articles, and things like that to help you get involved to make a difference. And then tonight, if you want to present a question or a comment for Governor Dunleavy, you can do that in the comment section on Facebook or the chat box there on our website, and we'll do our very best to get those. I want to thank all of our members at Truth and Liberty for your financial support tonight. You're helping us to do what God's called us to do here, to make a difference and to equip the body of Christ to stand up for truth in the culture. And if you would like to be a member, we would welcome that. All you have to do is go on truthandliberty.net to the donate page and just register there to give a donation of at least $5 a month or more on a recurring monthly basis, and we'll send you a free gift in the mail. And the last thing I want to mention tonight is if you need someone to agree with you in prayer, Andrew's got a whole team of trained, Spirit-filled prayer ministers standing by, and you can call in and have someone agree with you at 719-635-1111. And so with that, I'll turn it back to you, Andrew.
Amen. All right, so like I said, we've got the governor of Alaska with us tonight, Governor Mike Dunleavy, and my connection with him is actually one of our Charis Bible College graduates, Corey Young, and this young man is he's a really exceptional person, and he's from Alaska, I believe, and then he went back and now he's working with the governor, and we actually had one of our missions group in 2020 that went to Alaska because we weren't able to travel overseas. And we just got some great reports, and the governor met with them and was very gracious to everybody. And so anyway, we've established a little connection. And so, Governor, we are glad to have you with us tonight. Welcome to our Truth and Liberty livecast.
Great to be on. Thanks for having me.
And you moved to Alaska, I believe, from Pennsylvania is what you told us, and in '83, and you began logging. Now, that's quite a story, success story, going from logging to being a governor. You've probably got quite a story to tell about that.
Yeah, so I came up to Pennsylvania right out of college. Always wanted to go to Alaska because I just always loved the outdoors, and ended up in a logging camp in Southeast Alaska. And spent a little bit of time there, and then finished off my, just needed a couple more courses for my teaching degree. Became a teacher out in rural Alaska, was a principal superintendent. Spent almost 20 years in the Arctic, small villages, small Eskimo villages. My wife is from one of those villages. She's an Eskimo lady. We've got 3 girls that were born in rural Alaska. And so it's every day is an adventure. I'd have to live 8 lifetimes to see everything I want to do in Alaska, and so it's for me, it's been a fantastic journey.
And so, if I'm correct, you live in Wasilla?
Yes, Wasilla.
That's
yes.
Great. So anyway, maybe you could give us a little background or a little pitch for Alaska. As we were talking before this, you were sharing with us a lot of things that I didn't even know about Alaska. So we've got people watching from all around the world, not just the United States, but what's good about Alaska?
Everything. So it's, it's part of the United States. A lot of folks sometimes don't realize that. I think Alaska's its own place. It's the 49th state. We became a state in 1959. It's the largest state by far. It's 2.5 times the size of Texas. Prior to 1981, it used to have 4 time zones. It's the furthest. This is going to be a little a thing that people can share. It's the northernmost state. It's the westernmost state, further west than Hawaii, and it's the easternmost state. Well, how could that be? But because the Aleutians press out over the international date lines, so if it's Monday here, it's Tuesday there.
Wow.
And so we've consolidated our 4 time zones into 2 time zones. As a matter of fact, Alaska is so far west, we are closer to Australia than California, if you can think about that. We are 9 hours by plane to any other place in the Northern Hemisphere. We're strategically located. We have more coastline than the rest of the United States put together. That's how large the state is.
Wow.
As I mentioned earlier, we have about 150 volcanoes in the state of Alaska, 30 are active. We have some terrific earthquakes. We have incredible, obviously, animals with our bears and our whales and our moose, etc. About 730,000 people in the state of Alaska. We have the largest Native American population per capita in Alaska at about 15%. It's summer in Alaska, so it's lighter in Alaska than the other places in the United States. So, for example, the further north you go in Alaska, the longer it stays light until you get to Barrow, which is on the Arctic coast. And the day in Barrow starts in May, and the sun doesn't set again until August. Wow. And so it's really a spectacular place. Right now it's about, I'm in Juneau, Alaska. It's about 72 degrees. It's very pleasant. Up north by Anchorage, it's about 75 degrees. And the further north you go in the summertime, for example, to Fairbanks, it's going to be in your 80s. I mean, the high temperature in Fairbanks, Alaska, the record high in that area was 100 degrees, same high as Hawaii. And one last thing is on June 21st, which is the longest day of the year, the minor league baseball team in Fairbanks starts its game at 12 midnight. Because it's light.
Wow. Well, you are quite the PR person for Alaska. That's awesome. So what is the political climate of Alaska? Is it conservative, liberal, middle of the road overall?
It's an interesting state. It's the Constitution was drafted by folks that were Democrats back in the 50s. It's libertarian leaning in many respects. But it's also got a conservative overlay. And so, for example, we are a strong Second Amendment state. We were one of the first states, along with Wyoming in 2010, to declare ourselves a Second Amendment sanctuary state. Most people in Alaska understand weapons, understand guns. Folks hunt, folks shoot. And so in Alaska, you can pretty much carry a gun anywhere you want, with the exception of the courts, without a permit. And so it is a pretty liberal state. What I mean by liberal is when it comes to the Second Amendment, our carrying and our possession is probably second to none. We elect Republicans for the most part to our statewide offices. Our three congressional delegates, we only have one representative, Don Young, but they're all Republican. I, as a governor, we're Republican. We pretty much have a split legislature, though, between Democrats and Republicans. And so, it's an interesting state. We're detached from the rest of the country, so we learn to do a lot of things on our own up here. Not that we're forgotten per se, but with a small population of 730,000 people spread over, like I said, a subcontinent, you got to learn to work together. So we've done a pretty good job. For example, this past year, when a lot of cities down south, large cities, were rioting or looting, burning, shootings, Alaska had none of that. We didn't have a pane of glass broken in the state of Alaska.
Praise God.
Folks seem to get along up here pretty well. We respect our police, our military. We have a number of military bases up here. People don't realize that we are only 50 miles from Russia, from mainland to mainland, and only 2.5 miles between two islands, one in possession of America, Alaska. We have a small Eskimo village on that island, Little Diomede. And 2.5 miles away in the Bering Strait is Big Diomede, in which the Russians have a military presence. So we are very close to the action. We are an Arctic state. We border two oceans, the Arctic Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. And so it's never a dull moment up here in Alaska. Hmm.
So could I ask you what kind of influence or what kind of fallout or impact has like Trump made on Alaska versus Biden? Have you noticed the difference? How are the people responding?
Yeah. Big difference. So I met with President Trump about 9 times, and what would happen is he would stop in Anchorage, Alaska to fuel when they're going over to the Asian countries. It's the fueling spot for Air Force One. So we would make an arrangement. We'd go out to the plane on Fort Richardson, Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson is what they call it. And I'd get on the plane, meet with the president. We'd sit down, we'd talk about, he'd always ask me the same question, which is really, I respected this a lot about the president. What can I do to help Alaska? He would also come out and meet the troops all the time. And quite frankly, I would say that President Trump was probably the best president in the history of Alaska, for Alaska. Why do I say that? Again, he'd say, what can we do to help? So under President Trump, we got things open for exploration and development, such as ANWR, the Tongass National Forest, offshore oil. He signed a presidential permit for a potential extension of a railroad from Alberta, Canada through Alaska. The list goes on. And so when President Trump left office, we were hit immediately with the new administration on shutting almost all those things down and then some. And so Alaska is an interesting state because in order for Alaska to be allowed into the Union in 1959, we had to agree to a thing called the Statehood Compact, which was an agreement between the future state of Alaska and the federal government. And within that compact, we were compelled to develop our resources. This is the irony with regard to what's happening today. We were compelled to develop our resources as part of the agreement to become a state because our population was so small at that time. And the size of the state was too large for some of the federal officials to believe that we could pay our own way with a thing like an income tax. So we were really supposed to develop our mining plays, develop our timber, develop our fishing, our oil, our gas. But as we see what's happening now, we're getting a lot of that stuff, quote, canceled in this world of cancel culture. So a lot of these projects, a lot of these possibilities are being canceled with the help of what we refer to as extreme environmentalist groups across the country that are focused in targeting Alaska. And quite frankly, it's going to be a bit of a problem for Alaska. And here's the irony I don't think people understand. I make this case all the time. It's very important. If you really care about the environment, you want to do this type of work here in America, here in Alaska. Why? Because you can see what's going on. You can watch what's going on. For example, about 1,000 miles west to us is a Russian gas field called Yamal. It's a new gas field, relatively speaking. But they flare their gas. There's 1,500 gas wells flaring, burning right now as we speak. In Alaska, we don't flare any gas. So Alaska really protects its environment probably better than any other place on the planet. Yet when we're denied these opportunities by this new administration to mine or to do oil, gas, you're going to send that opportunity overseas to Africa, South America, Asia, where most likely the environmental regulations are not anywhere near Alaska. So you send over, you basically end up destroying the very thing you claim to want to protect. This is with regard to the NGOs and some of the extreme environmentalists. But you also send over the jobs and the opportunities. So we become dependent upon foreign nations for some of these raw materials. It just doesn't make any sense.
And you correct me if I'm wrong on this, but President Trump withdrew from the Paris Climate Accords, and the pollution in the U.S. went down. It is the lowest of any developed nation, and it created jobs and just all kinds of good things happened by that. And now they're back in, or they're entering into the Paris Climate Accords. And like you're saying, it's just going to ship everything to these other countries that don't have any restrictions. It's not helping anything, and it's hurting jobs and hurting our economy.
Exactly. It's exactly what's occurring. It makes no sense, no logical sense.
I tell you, that seems to be the Democrats' MO, is just do whatever's illogical.
Governor, on that climate issue, I'm just curious, here in the lower 48, when we hear about political issues related to the environment up in Alaska, it's like there's this picture painted of fear-mongering that there's going to be devastation of the natural habitats of who knows what, moose and elk and all this other bears and things. And it strikes me, though, that the people I know from Alaska are pretty environmentally conscious. Do you have any thoughts about that? Is that a false narrative? And what do you say?
No, I think it's accurate. We see, it's not an either or for us in Alaska. We can protect and love the environment, because if you're in Alaska, you love the outdoors. You're outdoors all year long. And so we love the outdoors. We love the pristine environment that we have. I mean, Alaska's hallmark is wilderness. But at the same time, Alaska was purchased by William Seward in 1867 from the Russians for the purpose of its resources to help this country, but also for its geopolitical location, both of which are at play today, both of which are just as relevant today, if not more so. And so I'll give you an example. I have 3 daughters. They all work at a mine above the Arctic Circle. They're Native Alaskans. Their mother is Native Alaskan. A lot of the Native Alaskan folks that I know are involved in resource extraction, exploration, and development. And they live on top of these oil fields in many cases, or these gas fields. They live right next to these mining plays. They want opportunity for their kids and grandkids, but they also want to protect the environment. And so this idea that if Alaska is left to its own devices, it'll destroy itself, really is a false narrative. And what you have is you have a whole new industry that's been developed called big environment. You know, they talk about big oil, but there's big environment. And as you said, there's a lot of fear mongering. But if people were to come to Alaska, really sit down and talk with folks in Alaska, sure, they're going to find some folks in Alaska that don't necessarily care about exploration, development of our mining plays and our oil plays. But at the same time, they're going to find a lot of Alaskans that do, and it's made a difference in their lives. And so, you know, what we're asking from the Biden administration or everybody else is, hey, look, let's help protect the environment. Let's help with renewables, for example. Alaska is really the one state in the country that has just about any and all renewable potential, including the second largest tides in the world in Cook Inlet, geothermal, wind, solar, you name it. But that doesn't mean we don't do oil and gas too. We should take advantage. This is the hallmark of America, and I would say the Trump administration. They were all about taking advantage of every opportunity to create jobs, create wealth, get us off of being dependent upon foreign actors. We're doing the opposite now, and it makes no sense. It's going to weaken this country, and I got some real concerns.
Well, I believe that reflects that Trump was a businessman, and Biden, the only business he's ever been in is politics. Amen. That makes a big difference in the way they govern. So you were into education. You were in that for a number of years. Is all of this woke culture and critical race theory, is that bleeding into the school system up there?
Not to the extent, from our observation, not to the extent at all, like it is in the lower 48. That doesn't mean that there are folks not talking about it, but in terms of what you read on the news every night, we don't see that here in Alaska. And we're not saying it's not going to come here, but again, Alaska, another thing that people don't understand about Alaska is, especially Anchorage, Alaska, our largest city of almost 300,000 people, it is the most diverse city in the United States. More diverse than any other city. Well over 100 plus languages are spoken in the school system in Anchorage, Alaska. We have folks from all over the world that come here. We also have, as I mentioned earlier, the highest percentage of Native Americans as part of our population, 15%. So what you have in Alaska is truly, to a great degree, a melting pot. And so I mentioned earlier, we didn't have any riots or shootings or lootings up here this last summer. We get along pretty well. But when it comes to some of these other issues, we seem to be able to work it out for the most part. That doesn't mean there's not going to be agitators or activists that are going to try and split Alaska, like to some extent what's happening down south. But again, I want to also say this. That doesn't mean that there are certain things that we could do better in this state or in this country. We all realize that. We all understand that. But pulling down statues, for example, or putting into curriculum some of these ideas, these concepts that really aren't based per se in fact and are more fiction. We should be tearing down things in this country. That's not what it was about. We should be putting up statues. If there's a statue missing, we should put the statue up, not tear the others down. So this idea of canceling who we are, canceling our history, it's going to end up canceling the future is the problem.
You know, I've had it compared. Bill Federer said that a country that forgets its history is like a person that has Alzheimer's, and you just literally can't function. And that's what they're trying to bring us to by doing this cancel culture stuff. It's not healthy. Even the Bible talks about it's a command not to tear down your neighbor's landmark. You need to remember these things, whether they're good or bad. You need to remember what's going on. So let me ask you about Roe versus Wade and the pro-life movement up there in Alaska. Is that issue, or what's happening?
Yeah, it's an issue. Unfortunately for Alaska, abortion is legal here in the state of Alaska. And I say that, and people know that I'm pro-life, and that this is, in my opinion, this is a very unfortunate situation. We have a judicial system that supports abortion in the state of Alaska, which I also think is unfortunate. The judicial system in Alaska, the judges are selected by the Lawyers Guild, basically in Alaska. They're not elected. What happens is the Lawyers Guild picks judges. They'll send us a pool of judges, at least 2 of them, for the various court positions. And I need to pick from that list according to the Constitution. And so I think it started out probably in the in the eyes of some back in the 50s is a good idea, but there's a number of folks in Alaska that think that this is not necessarily working out for Alaska. We'll see what the future holds, but unfortunately, like I mentioned, currently abortion is legal in Alaska. That's a problem for a lot of folks up there.
Well, Richard is a lawyer, and he was saying that just about all lawyers, or the vast majority of them, have gone to the left en masse. And so to have lawyers picking the court judge system, that's not a good deal, or I can certainly see how it could be misused.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that the people of Alaska don't have a say in the selection of their judges. And it's handled by the ones who benefit from the judges' rulings. That seems like a conflict of interest to me. What do you say?
Well, yeah, it's kind of like having the Chamber of Commerce select your legislators. I mean, even the legislature up here does not have a confirmation process on judges. They don't. So yeah, it's there's more and more folks starting to talk about this, and they're thinking about the future on where this is going to go.
Awesome.
Well, Governor, do you have any thoughts on Roe versus Wade being overturned? There's a new case pending at the U.S. Supreme Court out of Mississippi, and some of the folks who watch that really closely are hopeful for an overturn. And if that happens, what do you think will happen in Alaska after that?
Well, theoretically speaking, if Roe v. Wade is overturned, then it goes back to the states, for each of the states to make their decisions on, depending upon the ruling and the wording of the ruling and the opinion of the courts, I should say. There's a chance that it goes back to the states, and the states make their decisions. I don't, like I said, in Alaska, unfortunately, for those that are pro-life like myself, you may not see much change, because the current structure and how the courts are selected in Alaska would still end up with having folks that have ruled and have given opinions that favor the pro-abortion side of things. And so I don't know what will happen as a result of that. There probably would have to be some action on the part of the people of Alaska to change how the judiciary is selected, even if Roe v. Wade is overturned at the federal level.
Well, President Trump put in over 200 conservative judges in the appellate court system. Did that affect Alaska any at all? Did he appoint any up there?
Yeah, I'll say like in the Ninth Circuit, we're part of the Ninth Circuit, and I think there's been some balance added to the Ninth Circuit. We'll see how that plays out in a number of court cases that Alaska will be involved in, especially along the lines of resource development, as I mentioned earlier, in our pushback against the Biden administration, trying to undermine the very essence of how Alaska creates jobs, creates wealth. So we'll see, but certainly President Trump worked overtime on that, and time will tell. But I think it has restored some balance to some of these courts, to be honest with you.
I actually saw a couple of conservative rulings that came out of the Ninth Circuit, which in the past that never happened. So it's at least made a dent in the problem.
There you go.
That's good.
Exactly.
So tell us about the COVID and all of the restrictions. What happened in Alaska with that?
Yeah, so we got our first cases, a year ago in March, like the rest of the country. And Alaska's in an interesting position because, as I mentioned, 15% of our population is Native American. So what does that mean when you develop a response to this virus that all of a sudden descends upon this world? In 1918, Alaskan natives were hit worse than any other population on the planet, with the exception of maybe Samoa. We had a lot of folks that were wiped out as a result of that Spanish flu. As a matter of fact, when I first came up here in the early 80s, I spoke with elders, Native elders, who had experienced a loss of family members. Some of them were put into orphanages. Some of them were put into missions. And so that resonated with a lot of us. We didn't want to have that repeat here in the state of Alaska. But Alaska was interesting because we have the fourth busiest cargo airport in the world at Ted Stevens. So a lot of our Asian traffic from China comes to Anchorage, Alaska. And we were concerned about the virus coming to Alaska. And also Seattle, if you remember at that time, in the beginning of this virus, Seattle was being hit pretty hard, especially the senior centers. So until we understood the virus, what happened was, like a lot of states, we restricted some activities in March. But when we realized that this virus was not impacting children, when we realized that this virus, if we dealt with our seniors, our elders, and the most vulnerable, that we could manage this thing. So by early May, Alaska was fully open. And I do want to give a shout out to the President Trump, for Operation Warp Speed. I know that people laughed at him when he said, hey, look, we're going to work on coming up with something to combat this virus. We're going to come up and work on something, with some vaccinations and so forth. And long story short, they did. It was kind of remarkable in a way. And so in Alaska, if you want to get a vaccination, you get a vaccination. We don't mandate vaccines in the state of Alaska. We don't require them. I put forth a administrative order that we were not going to have vaccine passports here in the state. So I think we've done a pretty good job of threading the needle. And, unfortunately for Alaska, the Canadians have shut down their border, right? That's the border for us. So unlike a lot of states in the lower 48 in the southern part of the country where California, New Mexico, Texas, Arizona, they border Mexico. Our neighbor is Canada, and they've been very restrictive when it comes to this virus. So we've been restricted in our movement through Canada. We've also lost the cruise ship season last year, and for the most part, half of one this year because the CDC, and I think wrongly, and we joined in a lawsuit with Florida to sue the CDC to allow these cruise ships to come to Alaska. Our economy, especially our tourist economy, has been impacted pretty badly, actually. And so our economy is struggling a little bit, but we anticipate with more tourists coming up, independent travelers, that's going to help. But for the most part, we handled the virus pretty well. We did not have the restrictions that a lot of states had. We were the first state to drop the emergency in this country, and we've moved on. And again, we're looking at the virus in the rearview mirror at this point.
Okay, so you were the first state to remove the restrictions. Has it affected the COVID cases? Have you spiked, or what's happened?
Like a lot of places, in November we saw a bit of a spike, but then it receded. And as we came into December and January, it's been heading downward ever since. And right now, we've got some of the lowest numbers. We had the second lowest death rate. We still do. Or excuse me, we have the second lowest number of deaths associated with COVID, right after Vermont. So when you balance the health approach that we took, we never had a mask mandate in the state of Alaska either. So we had a balanced approach that took care of our vulnerable, our native population, our elders. But at the same time, we allowed folks to decide if they want to get a vaccine. We never mandated a mask mandate statewide. So it was kind of threading the needle, and I think our numbers and how we approach this thing, I think, demonstrate that we probably did it the right way for Alaska.
And I think that's consistent with Texas and Florida, who removed a lot of the restrictions, and their actual COVID cases had gone down after they removed all of the restrictions. I see some of these things. I don't know how accurate they are, but they're saying that actually wearing masks spreads the deal. I don't know, but anyway, it seems like those Alaska, Florida, Texas have not been any worse than any place else after they've removed the restrictions. I think it was an overreach of government.
Yes.
Absolutely. And also about the all of the government paying people not to work. What's Alaska doing with that?
Yeah, that's a bit of a problem, right? For a lot of states in this country, is a lot of money was put into unemployment insurance, and I think initially it was done because they didn't know how long this thing was going to last and what the impact was going to be. But again, really, what we need to do, what Alaska does, we adjust when we find out that the circumstances are changing. And so what we did is almost a month ago, we had notified our folks here in Alaska that we would not be continuing with the extra $300 in unemployment insurance benefits. And so here within about a week, those folks are going to have to find a job. And there are plenty of jobs that we have. There are lots of jobs. There are lots of job openings. And it's our anticipation that we'll have a number of Alaskans seeking jobs, which will help both the employers, but also help Alaskans get back to normal. I mean, and that's one of the things we always have to be careful about in an emergency. Most emergencies should only last, whether it's an earthquake, a fire, a flood, a very short duration, and then you recover. The federal government still has in place a declaration of emergency. And the problem with that is you start to normalize an emergency. Once you start to normalize an emergency, all kinds of distortions happen. both politically, legally, business-wise, socially. And for the most part, when you keep an emergency going, it's not necessarily good for a state, a city, or a country.
I agree 100%.
100%,
And it's an inroad or an opportunity for socialism and things to take over and big government to become the source of everything. I think it's a very bad thing.
I remember pretty soon after the whole thing started, we began hearing about the new normal. And, we need to be mindful of that to push back and get things back to the true normal, I think.
Yeah, I hope the new normal is, I hope we get back to the new normal being people have an opportunity to choose the way the way they want to deal with their lives.
Amen.
That's right.
We're going to go to some questions, but before we do that, last thing here, I know Franklin Graham helped you out during the pandemic, and you've got a relationship with him. How's that going?
Yeah, he's a good man. He's a good man. Franklin spent some time up here. He's got some property and an operation going in a small community here in Alaska on Lake Clark called Port Allsworth. I had an opportunity to meet him. She's really a terrific, down-to-earth kind of guy, and he has a real caring heart for Alaska natives. And so, when this pandemic hit, we were in communication, and we were running short, for example, on things like gloves and masks and gowns and that sort of thing. And we asked if there was any way that it's really Samaritan's Purse is the operation that he has. And we asked him if there was any way he could help out. And, he did. They sent up a jet full of that equipment, full of the gowns and so forth. We were able to help distribute those needed supplies to a lot of our agencies and our entities that deal with our Native Alaskan folks. And so he helped tremendously. And like I said, I'm looking forward to seeing him again this summer. We usually touch base and get an opportunity to visit when he's up here, but he's up here a lot. He's a good guy. I know a lot of folks see Franklin in his role as a very important preacher and man of God. But he's also just a down-to-earth guy. I mean, he's an Alaskan in many respects.
Well, I want to thank you for the way you received him. I remember when he went to New York and set up a field hospital, and man, they came out against him and said that they would have nothing to do with any Christian that came to help. And I mean, that's such a departure from the way that this nation started. And it sounds like Alaska's still holding on to a lot of the Judeo-Christian values that made this nation great. We really appreciate you doing that.
Amen.
It's awesome.
Thank you.
Amen. All right, so we got some questions coming in.
Yes, we do. Governor, we've got a viewer here who's interested in your background in education, and they're asking what you think we need to do to fix the education system in this country.
Boy, it's a tough one because it's so integrated into the lives of most Americans, right? Parents, two-parent families, especially single parents, they have to work, so their kids are sent to school, and there's a difference between schooling and education. You can be educated by your experiences, by reading a book, by watching something occur. Schooling is oftentimes the structures, the getting on the bus, the getting in line, the lunches, the recess, the classes, and so forth. And I'm not saying learning can't happen in that scenario, but there is a little bit of a difference oftentimes in schooling and education. Parents have to get involved. Parents have to get involved. Parents, I think one of the most important elected positions going forward, and I was a school board member and a school board president. And one of the things that we did is we focused on choice programs for kids and parents. We have one of the most, we probably have the most robust homeschool laws in the entire nation. In the state of Alaska, if you want to homeschool your child, that's all you have to say. Government doesn't get involved. Government doesn't track you. Government doesn't create laws and regulations to follow you around. We also have a public homeschool approach in which you can enroll in a public school, but you're also homeschooled. So you have the freedom to take your child overseas, maybe your child works with you, complete freedom. You're attached to a public school and they work with the parents and they broker educational services. And so I think parents are going to have to really get involved. They're going to have to really understand what's happening in their schools. And I would urge parents, if they really want to help, if they've ever had an interest in getting into politics to make a difference, your local political situation, school board, city council, mayors are absolutely crucial. And so I would urge parents to get involved in the political process. I always say this to people, and I really believe it to be absolutely the truth. You could either be a victim by not getting involved, by not supporting, by not voting, by not contributing, by not running. You can either be a victim, or you could actually determine a lot of times the outcomes. The other side on these issues is very energized, very organized, very focused. And the side that cares about freedom, the side that cares about their kids getting, quote, an education as opposed to indoctrination, they have to get involved. I mean, that's the only. What did Franklin say when this is an old saying or an old story that a lady approached Franklin when the Constitutional Convention was over and said, "What do we have, Mr. Franklin?" And he said, "A republic, if you could keep it." Yeah. And so it's really up to each of us. It's not up to the other guy or lady next to you. It's up to each of us to make this happen.
In Colorado, we have the first openly homosexual governor in the nation, and then we have our Senate and Congress are Democrat, and then we've got some transgender people on there, and they are just ramming this stuff down our throats. I mean, even kindergarten are being, they're normalizing transgenderism, homosexuality, and stuff like this. But we've got a local control state. I don't know how Alaska is. And so we are encouraging people to get involved in the school board and in the local stuff, and regardless of what they cram down our throat, we can exempt ourselves out on a local level, and that's where we're really going to make the difference.
At one time in this country, and I think it's a good thing. At one time in this country, because we were a melting pot of different cultures, of different ethnic groups, different races, different religions, that we're supposed to coalesce around the ideals of freedom, tolerance, etc. There was a time in this country where we tolerated each other. I remember as a kid growing up, you'd have friends in the neighborhood, and somebody's mother would be from Italy and speak Italian. Somebody's mother would be a Jewish and speak Yiddish. You all rooted for the same teams. Everybody saluted the flag. We all stood for the Pledge of Allegiance. When I was a kid, we still had prayer in school. But where I'm going with this is we always, as a mainstay of America, we tolerated each other. It's like riding on a bus, and somebody next to you is sitting there that's very different than you. In America, you tolerate the person. And then we went to accepting the person, which isn't a bad thing either. But what's happened now is we are being compelled to believe that we must embrace
and affirm
the lifestyles of people and embrace the outlooks of people. And to me, that you start to be forced into somewhat of a totalitarian type of situation where you can no longer voice your opinion or your thoughts, but you have to adopt those of others that you may not agree with. That is truly un-American.
I agree 100%, and it's gone beyond tolerance. It's now acceptance and promotion. Yeah, and the people that are yelling about tolerance the most are the most intolerant.
Yes.
They want us to tolerate them, but they show zero tolerance towards anybody who disagrees with them. So I tell you, we're in a mess. It sounds like Alaska has separated yourself from a lot of the things that are happening in the lower 48, I guess. Doesn't seem to be as big a problem.
We're not perfect, but we're trying to get along. It's like I said earlier, it's hard to bust agitators across state lines when your nearest state is thousands of miles away. And so it's a different ball game up here to a great extent.
And I firmly believe that there's not that many people in the states who are into anarchy and all of these kind of things. But when you have so many millions of people, you take a few people and percentage-wise, and the news media amplifies it out of proportion. You don't have those same things happening there in Alaska, doesn't sound like. How about another question?
Yes, well, we've got one here about some comments you made on the Alaskans having the highest gun ownership ratio, and the viewer is wanting to know, well, what's your crime rate like? Does that mean that there's a higher crime rate in Alaska?
In certain parts of the state, we have a high crime rate. We do, unfortunately, and we're working on that. We have a domestic violence issue in the state of Alaska that we're working on, and so we are not without our issues. There's no doubt about it. Again, there's certain areas of Alaska that the crime rate is very low. There's certain areas of Alaska that the crime rate is very high. Again, we support our police. We're giving our police more resources. We're going to be beefing up more of our prosecuting attorneys, but certainly this is a focus of ours, is to decrease the crime rate in the state of Alaska. But I don't think there's a correlation, to be perfectly honest with you, between the gun ownership in the state of Alaska and the crime rates in the state of Alaska. I think they're two different things.
Well, and we talked about Alaska being a sanctuary state. What exactly does that mean? What are the laws there related to guns that make it a sanctuary state?
Yeah, so in 2010, a bill was passed that basically said that we're going to honor the Second Amendment. We're not going to put in place bills or regulations or approaches that would interfere with the Second Amendment. 2013, there was another bill added that basically we're not going to assist federal officials that may want to implement bills that would be unconstitutional and against the Second Amendment in the state of Alaska. So basically what we're saying to the federal government, and for those that want to restrict our Constitution, is that Alaska views gun ownership and the right to bear arms as an essential right. As a matter of fact, in our Constitution, the state Constitution, we have a Second Amendment that safeguards our ability to possess, own, carry firearms. And so the interesting thing about Alaska, I think what you'll find is there may be some disagreement between different parties, such as Republicans and Democrats on some things. But when it comes to gun ownership in Alaska, you'll see Democrats oftentimes support gun ownership in Alaska too in the Second Amendment. So I think we're going to be okay there, but again, we got to keep our eye on the federal government and what's happening there with some of the laws that they're trying to put through.
Wow. I wonder if they're real Democrats. You know, we call people Republicans that are Republicans in name only rhinos. I wonder what they call a Democrat that doesn't follow the Democratic mantra.
Yeah. Traitor? No, I'm just... Governor, I got a question for you here, which is whether you're familiar with H.R. 1 pending in the United States Congress, where the federal government is basically trying to take over the method and manner of elections in the states, and whether you have a position on that.
Yeah, so the Constitution calls for the state legislators to determine how the elections are going to be run in the states, and quite frankly, that was one of the discussion points, a big one, in this last election between candidate Biden and President Trump, and that being that quote, because of the issues that happened during the pandemic, that there were some secretaries of states in the states, and there were some courts and judges that changed those election laws, not the legislature, but those other entities changed the election laws, which some would say run afoul of the Constitution that calls for the state legislatures to determine what those election laws are going to be. I'm a federalist, and what I mean by that is I believe in federalism. I believe in local control, and as I mentioned earlier, sometimes that's a double-edged sword. But I do believe that the states should have the right to determine their elections. I do believe the states are the ones that should determine the structure of these elections and how the methods by which these elections are held. And so I'm always leery of things that come down from the federal government. And I don't want to make it sound like it's just a knee-jerk reaction that anything that comes down from the federal government is something that I am just inherently going to oppose. I'm going to question it. There's no doubt about it. And we all should question it. Because I think you have a better situation when you determine these things and you implement these things at the local level. So H.R. 1 and the efforts of this administration and a Congress that aligns with this administration, I think all of us should be a little concerned about it, to be honest with you.
Well, Governor, you're in good company, because that's what Thomas Jefferson's big thing. Man, he thought that the federal government had way too much authority, and that was back in the 1700s. Wow. Yep. And that's where that term federalist stuff came from. So I agree that this is one of the firewalls that we have against this nation changing is if you have 50 states and if they have control, well, then it's harder to control 50 states than it is to just get hold of Washington, D.C. And that's what this H.R. 1 would do, is make it so that the states lose their rights and turn it all over to the oligarchy in Washington. And that would be a bad, bad thing.
Yeah.
Let me also mention, you were talking about the police, and just yesterday we had a law enforcement appreciation thing held at Barbecue Farm, and we funded the police. We gave them money instead of defunding them, but we were thanking them, and our sheriff said that Teller County has one of the highest per capita gun ownerships in the United States. I don't know how that compares to Alaska, but he said we've got a lot of guns, and because of it, he said that we don't have the crime and some of the things that other people do because they know that citizens are armed. They will protect themselves.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
So anyway, I think that that's a good thing. You know, I also read a thing that they said back in, I think it was the 1950s, you could order a gun through the mail with no background check, no restrictions whatsoever, have it shipped to you in the mail, and we didn't have any of the mass shootings and the things that we've got going today. Guns aren't the problem.
Interesting. In Alaska, we probably have the largest gun show in the country in a high school that's run by the hockey club.
Wow.
And you will, for several days, on the weekend, usually in January, early February, we have gun shows all over the state of Alaska. You can go in, you can sell your gun, you can buy a gun, and so we don't have the restrictions that other states have. Again, because of our belief in the Second Amendment and just the belief that in Alaska, I mean, obviously it's quote a frontier state, with folks carrying weapons because of our large and sometimes aggressive wildlife, but just nonetheless, we believe in the Second Amendment. And as I mentioned earlier, we support our police. We don't defund our police. I just went to a graduation of our police academy here on last Friday, and we support our military. We have a number of military bases up here. That we have the highest per capita percentage of retired veterans in our state than any other state. And so we like law and order. And I mentioned earlier, we do have a crime issue which we're working on, but nonetheless, I think you're going to see that most Alaskans, even those folks that are committing crimes, respect our military, respect our police.
Mm-hmm. You know, we've got a graduate that's living in Homer, Alaska, and she was a good friend of mine when she was in school. And I met a lady who's one of you, I think it's a state congresswoman, I'm not sure. But she is an elected official, and she was a part of the National Association of Christian Lawyers, which I'm on the board for that. And she was from Homer, and Delane, our graduate, discipled her. And she's a real committed Christian, so praise God.
I wonder if she's a state rep, because as I mentioned, our only representative is Don Young, who's been a representative.
Well, she must have been a state rep then, but she was a congresswoman, I guess, in the state there. It's awesome. Got another question?
Yes, we do. Anita here, watching on chat, or post this on chat, Governor, and she asks, will balanced individuals like yourself join forces with other governors to send messages to the White House and Congress about the need for the balanced energy approach that you have outlined here? And how can we amplify your voice?
Yes, we do. We have conversations all the time with governors in Wyoming, North Dakota. As a matter of fact, we signed on to a lawsuit against the federal government with Louisiana, who has a Democrat governor, John Bel Edwards. Louisiana is a pro-development state as well. We've been in conversations, for example, with the premier of Alberta, a Canadian province, who's also pro-development. So we are working with, we're strengthening our ties with those governors and those individuals in states that are pro-development. I mean, for example, my former state that I was born and raised in, Pennsylvania, has a huge gas find, the Marcellus shale gas find there in Pennsylvania. They're going to potentially run into some headwinds with this administration. And so we just believe that, again, the bottom line is this. We can manage our affairs better than Washington. We can manage the environment better than just about any place on the planet. We believe that here in Alaska. And we just want the opportunity to develop our resources and chart our own course within this federalist system. We don't need Washington telling us how to live, what we can develop, what we can't develop, especially on state land, and that's what they do oftentimes. And so, yes, we have joined. We are strengthening our ties with resource-producing states, and we're going to continue to do that. And here's one last thing that's, I think, very interesting. When it comes to cheap energy, who does it benefit the most? It benefits the poorest of the poor. Mm-hmm. It benefits the single mom who's trying to work and is driving maybe a used vehicle. This is not about driving brand new Teslas, and I have nothing against Teslas, but it's folks that have a lot of money don't necessarily need cheap energy like the poor. At the same time, when you defund the police, in many respects, it's going to impact those in our inner cities, some of the poorest of the poor that need that protection. And so I would ask that my friends on the other side of the aisle and in Washington to really think this through. When they believe that they're doing something good, that the ramifications of what they've done and the reverberations, they really think these things through, because in the end, I think they'll find in a lot of their decisions, they don't necessarily help the very people they purport to want to help.
Yeah, like President Biden canceling the Keystone pipeline, but backing some Russian pipeline. How does that make sense?
It doesn't. You know, the Russians, the Chinese, the Saudis, the Iranians, they're laughing all the way to the bank when we make these decisions. That's
a shame. Just about every woke position that I'm aware of hurts the poor. Defunding the police, it's that they're going to be hurt the most. And like you were saying, all of the energy things and on it goes. It's just a political agenda. It doesn't work in the real world.
Right.
Last question.
Got one more question. This is kind of interesting. Individual named Red on YouTube asks, Canada recently announced a native language council to preserve and promote, I don't know if I can pronounce this, but Inuktitut and others. Are you guys doing anything similar in Alaska?
Well, I think they were trying to say Inuit.
Inuit.
Oh,
our folks.
It's got a K in there.
Our folks are, we have Eskimo folks too, Yupik Eskimos and Yupak Eskimos. So we certainly promote the viability of native languages here in the state of Alaska. It's difficult for our native folks because everything is in English, TV is in English, with transportation, et cetera, makes it difficult. My wife grew up understanding the language of her parents and could speak to them to a certain extent, but we're losing it with each generation. So you're going to see more and more attempts along these lines to try and preserve the language, because the language does give a worldview, helps with a worldview that's different than English. I mean, even if you have a Inupiaq Eskimo person speaking English, there's a lot of things that are lost when their language is lost. And so I think all of us here in the state of Alaska would like to see the native languages.
Governor, I'm going to have to break in. We're just about out of time, but we sure thank you for doing this. And I tell you, this has been very informative. I'm sure a lot of people have been blessed. There's a lot of people that'll be ready to go to Alaska for a vacation at least.
We got lots of room.
So thank you for being with us. We want to thank CTN for carrying this on their network. They've been a real blessing doing that for us. And remember that we do this every Monday night at 6 p.m. Mountain Time. And we have on guests just like the governor here. We have on politicians, a lot of influential people, and it's very informative, and I believe it's helping you and blessing you. Remember our website at truthandliberty.net. Go there. We've got a lot of materials. So God bless you. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you again next week for our Truth and Liberty livecast, 6 p.m. Mountain Time.
Thanks, guys.
Join us next time for the Truth and Liberty broadcast. Find tonight's episode and related articles and links at truthandliberty.net. Truth and Liberty is viewer supported. If you'd like to help us continue our live casts, you can make a donation at truthandliberty.net.